Hello, welcome to the debate on Sky News. I'm Martin Stanford. Here's our take on developments brought together from America, the UK and around the world. Manhunt, 3 weeks on the run for the audacious convicts. But how and why? Tragedy in Tunisia, bankruptcy in Greece. Are you postponing European travel? And celebrating July the 4th. Is that why you're finding it hard to breathe after the fireworks? It was an audacious prison escape. Months of preparation, dry runs and coercion of prison staff. After 3 weeks on the run, it's over. One escapee dead, the other captured, and more than a dozen prison staff on enforced leave. This is the story of Matt and Sweat, two of America's most wanted, and how they almost got away. But how did it happen? Well, as usual, Democrat commentator Jeffrey Robinson is standing by in New York, and Conservative commentator Armstrong Williams is in Washington. Armstrong, these two guys very nearly got over the border into Canada, didn't they?
Believe it or not, there's a very popular national show in the United States called I Almost Got Away With It. And it's about people like them. And I'm sure they'll end up on the program. And you know what? It's not a perfect storm, but it's a plan that worked for a while. One out of 1,000, sometimes it works where they have the right plan, the right accomplice, and they get away. They find the right territory to escape to. That terrain in New York is very difficult. They found the right trailer to hide themselves. And they found the pepper that they could disguise the scent that would confuse the dogs. Anybody who's a hunter like myself understand that. But, it was just a matter of time before law enforcement caught up with them and took them out and finally arrested them.
Jeffrey, do we criticise the prison staff for letting it happen at all?
I think there's a lot of people who need to be questioned about this. And I disagree with you in that they almost got away with it. I think that Armstrong's got it right. They didn't almost get away with it. They were always going to be caught. First of all, the original plan was to go to Mexico, and the way they had rehearsed it, which they did the night before, they actually escaped the night before and came back into the prison, is they ended up at the wrong manhole and decided to change the plan. So they got that far. They understood how to do that. They did not understand how to survive in the woods and how to get where they were going. They only got 30 miles from Dannemora. What's more, the Canadian border was manned by both American law enforcement and Canadian law enforcement. They weren't going to get there. And if they had, they would have been arrested there. So, no, they were always doomed. But the point is about this, it brings up what a real story about American prisons. Dannemora, which is where Clinton is a 171-year-old prison. It was built in 1844. John Tyler was president of the United States when this was built, and most people never heard of him. It is a hellhole. The most famous prisoner ever held there was Lucky Luciano. It's a terrible, awful place to be. And you can understand why prisoners want to escape. What most people don't understand is that it's just as bad for the prison staff and the guards to work there as it is for them to be housed there.
Well, let's cross to Washington and get an insight from Rod Wheeler, who's a former homicide detective in D.C. They had to have accomplices, didn't they, to do this? And we still don't know the full range of exactly how many and what their involvement was. But the very fact they could start those relationships in jail and persuade someone to help them, that's worrying, isn't it, Rod?
Oh, absolutely. But I can tell you that here in the United States, it's not unusual for prisoners to try to become very close and very friendly with a lot of the correctional officers. As a matter of fact, right here in Baltimore, Maryland, just last year, 14 correctional officers were arrested because they did have involvement with prisoners, personal involvement with prisoners. Now, what's really fascinating about this case, though, I must say, is that not only the escape itself, which was very sophisticated and very meticulous, by the way, but how long these two individuals were able to evade police, which I can tell you there was well over 1,500 officers on the ground there in New York State, and we still could not find these guys for a period of 23 days.
And does that reflect badly on the police themselves? Do you think their techniques, their approach, their intelligence, was it all wrong?
No, I think there was a combination of reasons as to why we could not find them. First of all, we had well over 1,800, maybe even 1,000. And so what happened was we had to kind of separate and spread our resources to try to follow up on all of these leads. I think the second reason, and Armstrong touched on it, is that area up there in New York, let me tell you, that terrain is very, very difficult. And even for the dogs, we had canine dogs, sniffer dogs in that area. They picked up the scent, they lost the scent. And then it was raining. It was raining very, very bad in that area. So all of those things combined these individuals in their escape and kept them out as long as they were.
Armstrong, just reflect on Jeffrey's thought about the quality of life for the prison staff. Are they paid enough for what they do? Is the working environment correct for the job they have to take on?
I don't think it's the pay that we should concern ourselves with so much. There's a reason why we have the prisoners, and there's a reason why we have those guards selected to be on duty to make sure that they don't try that dastardly escape that they tried recently. But I think what we forget about is the human part. I mean, here's a woman who was married. She was able to be manipulated by a prison guard. It happens all the time. She was being able to be manipulated by this prisoner. She found herself weak. And once they're able to con you into the point where you become intimate with them and you become an adulterer, you're betraying your husband, you're betraying your oath of duty, then they have something to hold over your head. Then it's very difficult for you not to pursue what their agenda is. And what they don't understand is that these prisoners, while they may think they develop close relationships, they care nothing about these prison guards. In fact, all they want are their cigarettes, are the things they want smuggled in, or try to find a way to escape. And they cannot do it unless they go through manipulating human emotions, manipulating their mind, and eventually having these sexual relationships. And that is the most powerful drug. And what people are willing to do to maintain that, to protect it, to make sure they don't lose their jobs, which they did in the end, is just amazing. These are the kinds of things that you cannot factor in. And until you can separate and try to deal with that issue of these relationships going on, you will see this happening again.
Jeffrey, we have to therefore ask the governor, don't we, about the staff, about the supervision of the staff, the support the staff get, in order that these inappropriate relationships don't flourish.
Well, the superintendent of Dannemora and his deputy have both been put on administrative leave. But the problem is much deeper than that. And I don't know if Armstrong has ever visited people in prison. I know Rod certainly has. And I've interviewed people in prison. And it is a dismal, unhappy place for everybody. And what struck me the first time I ever went into a prison to interview somebody was the amount of contraband that I saw being brought in. I mean, it was astonishing. The things were being brought into these prisoners who have economic means and muscle to get certain things done, and in many ways control the atmosphere themselves. You see it on all the prison shows, for example, that we have here, where certain gangs control certain parts of the prison, and the staff just can't control that. What we need to do now after Dannemora is to take a look at who we incarcerate, how we incarcerate them, and the conditions under which these people are spending time, and what we can do to control them. They should not be running the insane asylum. It's really up to us. By the way, we also have private prisons in this country, and I know an awful lot of law enforcement people are very down on the whole idea of private prisons, run for profit. It's time we took a big look at who we incarcerate and how we hold them.
But Rod Wheeler, the problem with that, I guess, is that who cares, really? I mean, it's one of those problems in life, but for most ordinary citizens, they pay their taxes. You get rid of the bad guys, throw away the key and forget about them, don't you?
Well, yeah, that's the idea behind it. But at the same time, you know, the theory behind prison is rehabilitation, so that we can rehabilitate and get these criminals back to, you know, normal life in the United States. And obviously that's not happening because obviously someone has dropped the ball with our prison system and our penal institutions, whereby, like I said earlier, we see this happening more often than not. It's just not as reported. It's not as a big deal as it was with these two guys, Matt and Sweat. But I must say, after working many, many years in law enforcement and working and putting a lot of those prisoners behind bars, when these guys get out, they're very well schooled in terms of how to break out and other things like that that they learned inside the institution. So I think as a nation, we have to do our due diligence and really take a look at our penal institutions and ask ourselves, is this right for the way we are now? Is this right for the time that we're living in?
Armstrong, there's no appetite for that, though, is there, really? There's no politician's going to get votes in this election year by saying we need to be nicer to prisoners.
Absolutely not. And, you know, especially when you consider some of the crimes that have been committed. You know, but I do think there should be focus on how these prison guards selected, how easily manipulated they are. And I think Jeffrey makes an excellent point. There are very dismal conditions. There's a lack of self-worth and self-esteem. The guards don't want to be in there. These prisoners do every now and then accumulate money that they're willing to spend to get certain contrabands and other illegal things in there. And unless you find people who have the character, who have everything to gain, and they cannot be bought and sold inside that prison, and they do their jobs and they cannot be manipulated, I think it reflects more of the kind of people that we put in these prisons, prison guards, and why they're easily corrupted. I think that's where you need to revisit, because you get that in check, then you won't have the corporation and the fine line between the prisoners and those that are employed to guard them, and make sure they don't have these kind of escapes that we saw from these two who were eventually, one caught and one was eventually met his demise.
Yeah, but if you're trying to give Jeffrey, somebody a job whereby they're saying you're trying to help somebody start a new life, that's one thing. If you're just saying, actually, your job is to keep that guy locked up most of the day, feed him minimal amount of food in pretty hideous circumstances, and that's all your job entails, that's something completely different, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And there's very little rehabilitation that actually happens in prison. Most of it is university-level courses in crime for other prisoners. By the way, they also have a real influence. Many of them have real influence outside the prison gates. You get the gangbangers inside prison who have their mates outside who can intimidate guards' families from the outside. It's a terrible situation. But let me say this. You asked who cares. I'll tell you who cared about this one. All of those people, the innocent people living in Clinton County, New York, who lived in fear for 3 weeks, the two hardcore murderers were on the loose. That's who cares. No. We pay our taxes to make sure these people are kept inside, and have every right in the world to say it's time to reorganize prisons to make sure they stay inside.
You know, Jeffrey makes another good point, and I'll tell you why. Part of the survivor of these two escapees is that they were able to find cabins and break in. And when the homeowners returned, they found things that were missing and was out of order. And they called law enforcement, and lo and behold, they had been in those places. And you can imagine if they had walked in on some of these innocent people in that cabin, God knows what would have happened. So I do think the lives in that county were very much threatened also in that process.
Jeffrey Armstrong, thanks for the moment. A reminder, you can catch up with the Sky News debate on Apple TV, Roku, and catch up, and of course at skynews.com/US. We're in July. It's July the 4th weekend, and the summer holidays are within touching distance. But have recent events forced a change of plan? Do you ignore or embrace the threat of terror attacks and bankrupt countries? Just have a look at this map, for instance. This is the terror alert available around Europe and the Mediterranean. The countries, alarming number of them in bright red. Then you've got your ambers and your yellow, and only little old Switzerland there, look, in green, is actually got a low terror threat. Does that not just fill you with dread? Where in the world is left? Cuba, perhaps? Well, Paul Ruden is the Executive Vice President of the American Society of Travel Agents, the world's largest association of travel professionals. Paul Ruden, have you seen a change of plan for many people this summer?
No, Martin, we we really haven't. The data for this year is very strong. Fares generally are down to Europe and the Middle East. They're up in a few select places, but mostly down. And the volume of traffic continues to rise at a not great rate, but it is going up. So the available data is a couple of months old, but you have to understand that most of the business for trips to Europe and the Middle East was sold in the spring of this year and even in the winter of last year. That is the normal cycle for selling the North Atlantic. So we're anticipating a pretty good year. I think if we were seeing massive cancellations, we would have heard about them, and we haven't.
So despite the problem that Greece might not have a currency or any kind of economy left, and other Mediterranean countries may well suffer as well, despite the fact there are terrorists running amok on Tunisian beaches, you think American travellers have built a stern stuff, are they, and they'll stick to their plans?
Well, either they will continue to go to the places they originally intended to go. Some of them will change their plans and go to other places if they can find hotel rooms and air transportation to get them there. But again, the data does not suggest that there's a massive reaction to this. Tragically, our entire world is afflicted with these terrorist attacks. They're unpredictable. No one, including the most expert people, can say where the next attack is going to come from. And I think most Americans have decided they're not going to be intimidated about that. That doesn't mean they're going to go into Egypt when there are riots going on in the center of Cairo. Individuals have to make their own choices about these things, and most people are pretty intelligent about that, and they talk to their professional travel agent and get good advice about where they should go and where they shouldn't go.
Let's bring in Jeffrey Robinson in New York and Armstrong Williams, who's standing by in Washington. Jeffrey, I don't know if you were planning to come to Europe this summer or into the fall, but would you change your plans in the light of what's going on?
Not at all, and I don't think most Americans. I think Paul is absolutely right. Perhaps if you were planning on vacationing this summer in Tripoli or Damascus or Benghazi, you may have second thoughts. But if you're going to Paris, London, or Rome, no. I mean, it's these are major vacation tourist centers, and people are relatively safe. Now, even the French are going to still go to the Riviera in the month of August, and I suspect that the Englishmen, who like mad dogs go out in the noonday sun, have no plans at all to change their plans to come to Orlando and Disney. I'm sure that the summer vacation will go off just as planned for most people, despite the problems. And by the way, Greece does have a currency. It's called the euro. And right now, hotel rooms and restaurants are pretty cheap.
All right. So, Armstrong, Jeffrey seems to be suggesting that you might want to snap up a bargain and get over to Greece deliberately, perhaps.
You know, I actually think I have a very unique perspective on this topic. For the last 26 years, my business partners and I have owned boutique hotels in the south of France and in Spain. And so for the last 26 years, without interruption, I've either traveled to Europe or to the Middle East for at least a month or more. And already on my schedule, I will be in one of those targeted areas in Spain. And, you know, we've gone to Israel at the height of the terrorist attacks on restaurants and cafes. We have been on the street when buses were exploded, and we heard cell phones going off and realizing that nobody was going to answer because their loved one was dead. So we've been in the heart of it. And the last thing you should do is give in to terrorists and give in to terrorist threats because they win. And if you use common sense, not get into taxis or cars or go to places that you're unfamiliar with, if you follow common sense, if you stay close to the premises of your hotel, I think you're pretty safe. Yes, people are targeted, but I think you have to really go off the beaten path in a very independent way to be a victim of an attack, especially if we spent a month in Egypt and they told us there are certain cars you don't get into, there are certain routes you don't travel. If you follow the guides of that country and you don't try to think that you're invincible, I think the likelihood of you being a victim of a terrorist attack is highly unlikely.
Paul Ruden, do you think that some of the determination that Armstrong talks of, let's go ahead with the vacation we have planned, let's not change our things because otherwise the terrorists win, is that a sentiment, do you think, at the heart of most Americans who are travelling this summer?
Without a doubt, and I think it's been that way since this problem of terrorism began, and I don't think it will ever let up. He's absolutely correct. You simply cannot crawl into your shell and stay home. And Americans are not going to do that. They will consult their professional travel agents about where they can go and where they perhaps shouldn't go. We give advice all the time about avoiding big crowds where there's demonstrations going on and so forth. People should stay away from those things. But if you use common sense and pay attention to the news about what's going on around you, even when you're in that country, the chances of something happening to you are probably a lot less than they are that you might be involved in a serious accident headed to the airport, or even going to work in a major city in the United States. So I think Americans will stay the course. Certainly support that.
Jeffrey and Armstrong, you're men of the world, well-travelled, I know. Let's ask you some top tips. I mean, Jeffrey, in terms of Europe, It's not just the obvious, the France, the Spains, or Greece, for instance. I mean, what, the Dalmatian coast, little old Croatia. That's quite nice, I hear.
Yes, it is. I sailed there many years ago. Listen, I lived for many years in the south of France, and I would love to know the addresses of those boutique hotels that Armstrong lives in, so that my wife and I can be his guest in them. We spent a lot of time in the south. My kids were born there, and she's from there. So the south of France is still one of the great places. But you know, Portugal is still one of the great secrets of Europe because they put it way off to the side. Most tourists, American tourists, don't get there. The British discovered it years ago because it was pretty cheap and cheerful and good food and great beaches. There's a lot of Europe to be enjoyed, and there are small towns in France where you can still find the restaurant owned by Mama and Papa where they grow the vegetables in the garden. There's a lot to be said for France, for Italy, for England. England is filled with surprises. And again, as Paul said, if you consult your travel agent, a professional travel agent will help guide you and tell you pretty much where things are safe. You're going to have a great time. And
Armstrong, is there anywhere in Europe where you don't have a hotel?
Of course, but I've got to tell you, there are some gems in Europe. I mean, Prague. You go down to the Amalfi Coast in Italy. Are just incredible places, especially if you go to churches with all the skulls of the victims from Hitler's reign, to see that history. And also in Greece, to go down to the wine country, in the country where they have the farming country, it's just breathtaking. It reminds you of what their natural wonders are, which is quite different from the United States. And I got to tell you, I spent a lot of time in Rotterdam, in Amsterdam. There's more than just the red light district to see in those spectacular places. So yes, Europe is just absolutely wonderful to visit, especially during the summer, but especially during the fall when it's much cooler. And the prices are far better when you go in the fall than during the dead of summer where the prices are sky high.
Paul, can I just ask you a bit closer to American mainland, and that is Cuba. Now, relations are supposed to be thawing there. Are people rushing to go visit?
It's not quite a land rush just yet because the U.S. government still has in place a travel ban with respect to U.S. citizens, and only select categories of people can go there. They cannot go there for tourism purposes. We're working very hard to get the Congress to see the light on this. We're part of a major coalition on the subject that is active right now, putting huge resources into this so we can open up Cuba to travel by Americans as it should be. The policy we have in place now simply hasn't accomplished its purpose, and it's time for change. When that change happens, we expect major volumes of people going to Cuba by air and on cruise ships.
And Paul, just tell us, you said some people are allowed to go. Is there very few? What category of person do you have to be then to be allowed to go to Cuba right now?
Well, there are certain kinds of people-to-people interactions that are permitted, education programs that are permitted, but they're very tightly controlled and very limited as to who can qualify. So the good news is that one of the major global distribution systems has just opened up its systems to the possibility of booking air trips there for those people who are qualified to go now. And we're hopeful that we can get those categories expanded to the point where there are no categories. And it's the only country in the world, I believe, that we have this kind of restriction for. Americans should be able to go wherever they want to go, wherever their good judgment tells them that they would like to go and experience the culture. And that's the goal we have for Cuba.
Paul Ruden, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Finally, this weekend couldn't have come at a better time for July the 4th celebrations. But, and there is always a but nowadays, a study has found that the firework displays boosted the levels of airborne microscopic particles, and these can cause serious respiratory and cardiovascular problems. Let's ask Jeffrey Robinson in New York and Armstrong Williams in Washington, D.C. about this. Jeffrey, are these guys going to find something to moan about now?
Well, now just hold on. I'm going to invite my friend Armstrong to gang up with me against you guys in Britain. There may very well be problems with the fireworks, but you're talking about the 4th of July. And I might remind you guys in Britain that the 4th of July was not, as you consider it, the illegal overthrow of the rightful British government by force and violence. That's not the way we see it. And I understand you may not celebrate it, but here's the deal. If Armstrong will join me, we would like to invite you, even with our smelly, polluting fireworks, to our barbecues, because there are no grudges 239 years later, to celebrate the 4th of July with us. We don't hold a grudge, and we're not going to dump your tea in the harbor anymore. Happy 4th of July, despite the fireworks.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Armstrong?
Listen, what you're speaking about will be the last thing on America's mind. It's a holiday. There's alcohol. There's cigarettes. There's love and warmth, and we have a lot to celebrate, especially after what happened in Charleston and how we saw Americans come together. There's still pride and hope for America. That is still that shining city on the hill. And let me tell you, we all realize we're going to die of something. I think many Americans say, well, we're going to get a little something in our lungs. That's the day that's worthwhile to get it.
Yeah, and if the guys try and take the fireworks out of the July the 4th, does that take a lot away from it?
They're not going to take the fireworks out of July 4th. That is a hopeless dream, to say the least. If you want to galvanize all Americans, that's the way to do it.
Armstrong,
Jeffrey?
have you noticed that our British friends didn't bring this story up on Guy Fawkes Night?
No, well,
and they are our British friends, and they will celebrate with us.
Indeed we will. And we have really smelly bonfires that night as well, which goes to add even more pollutants into the atmosphere, I'm sure. Gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed.
Happy 4th of July.
That's it for this edition of The Debate. You can continue watching Sky News on Apple TV, on Roku, on Catch Up, and of course at skynews.com. Until next time, goodbye.